Okay, so back in the lab, we're getting ready to go out onto the Acadia field trip. And I got these three maps put on the backboard in the lab. And when we get closer to this one, this map here on the right, and fortunately, the cool thing about this is they're all at the same scale. So the three different maps show three different aspects of the same place at the same size. And what we got here on the left, this map that's dominated by green, that's what we call a topographic map. And topographic maps, if I zoom in, will show, you'll see all the contour lines on the map, and where they're close together, they're steep, where they're further apart, they're gradual. And this basically just shows what the landscape looks like on the island of Mount Desert Island. And the island of Mount Desert Island was named by Champlain when he came over here in his explorations. And he called it Mount Desert Island. In French, it's Île de Mont Désert. And what you find, it's like the island of deserted mountains. And if you've ever been there, very few of the mountains have trees at the top. And you can tell that from looking at the topographic map, where there's white, there's not any vegetation, or if it is, at least it's not trees. And just see if I can find Cadillac Mountain is right here. Unfortunately, on this trip, the road that goes up to Cadillac Mountain is closed, and we can't get you up there and have you take a look. But we're going to spend most of our time looking at the geology around here on the eastern side of Mount Desert Island. And if it comes that the park opens, I'm going to get back up there and I'll try and get more video for you to see for the field trip. This particular map, looking from the back, is the bedrock geology. This is what it would look like ideally if you took all the vegetation off and all the sediment and soil that have accumulated on Mount Desert Island. And what you can basically see in this, as well as on the topographic map, is it looked like someone just took their hands and scratched down the surface. Almost exactly like what happened in the creation of the Finger Lakes in central New York State. But what I want you to see in this particular view of Mount Desert Island is effectively, it kind of looks like a target. There's this tan colored material, then you get yellow and orange and pink around the edge, and there's a little bit of green up here, and this brownish stuff over here. If you actually look at the map, you can see that there are different parts. The brown that you see here, that's effectively the granites of Cadillac Mountain, called the Cadillac Mountain granite. They're intrusive rocks. They formed at depth, and when the volcano erupted, you get to see those things. And this green over here, we're going to talk about, that's the Bar Harbor Formation. We may see some other varieties as well over here on the side. This brown here, that's the Ellsworth Formation, that we'll stop and look at those rocks. Out here, there's a Cranberry Island series. We're not going to actually get an opportunity to go to those because I don't have a boat, and it's not the best weather this time of year as well. So there's Bar Harbor Formation, Cadillac Mountain granites, the Bar Harbor Formation again, some other intrusive rocks that are granitic. These all were in place, and I'm trying to find, oh, right over here, this material here, this sort of weird color brown, this is part of the shatter zone, and we're going to walk over and take a look at the shatter zone over here at the edge of, on the eastern side of Sand Beach. So that kind of gives us the broad overview of the type of rocks and what exactly the geology looks like in terms of the bedrock. And this third map that I put over here, this one shows the superficial deposits. And the superficial deposits are effectively all the material that was deposited as the continental ice sheet retreated, and left behind material that was picked up by the ice as it advanced, and then deposited as the ice melted, either as outwash or as eskers or till or kames, or a whole variety of different geologic features. So that's sort of the framework, that's the geologic setting of the area, and we're gonna run out there and take a look at some of the geology that's out there. So I'm gonna run out, I gotta go get to my car, and then I'm going to drive over to Acadia, and we'll stop in Ellsworth before we actually get to the park. And we're going to take a look at the Ellsworth schist right in the town of Ellsworth. Then we'll head over, we'll look at the Bar Harbor Formation, and we'll look at some granite, so the Cadillac Mountain granite, and we'll look at some of the rocks in the shatter zone. And if we have time, I'm going to try and get over to the other side of the island and look at some of the Ellsworth schist over here as well. I'll try and get you to see most of the features. The weather's not that great, and it's not predicted to be much better, so unfortunately you're going to get what you get, and hopefully it'll be good enough so you can get an idea of what the rocks and how amazing Acadia National Park. Okay, so as Bob Seger would say, here I am out on the road again. And I stopped here. It's an awful lot of traffic noise, but I stopped here particularly to look at this rock. This rock outcrop is probably one of the best exposures on the way to Acadia National Park of the oldest rock that you can see in the park. This is part of a rock unit called the Ellsworth schist, and in the surface here you can see all kinds of undulations. There's some very large ones, and those large undulations are actually glacial grooves that were produced when the continental ice sheet flowed over Maine, flowed over the bedrock, and then actually carved and scratched features into the rock. And here I'll kind of get closer to these. I'm actually walking up the outcrop. Over here you can see some lines that have been covered over, some of them with asphalt. What I want you to take a look at here is you can see the undulations and the crenulations, the folds in the rock here, and the really thin layers. That's characteristic of the Ellsworth schist. And you can actually see, looking at the rock here, one of the things that you want to remember is that this consists of a schist unit and some gneiss. It's hard to find any gneiss in this particular outcrop, but actually what I might start to think of would be starting to be the development of a gneiss are these layers here, where you actually can see large blebs or maybe globs of quartz that have separated out from the rocks. And if you look really closely here, you can see how these rocks have been deformed and folded underneath the pressure that formed these rocks. Now, if we go back to the beginning and think about these rocks, what we've got is the oldest rocks here. These formed in relatively shallow water as material flowed off the newly formed tectonic mountain range in rivers that went out to the ocean and accumulated here in thin layers. And sometimes you can find white layers actually within the outcrop, and consequently those represent ash falls. I'm trying to look for one so I can show it to you. There's definitely a thicker layer here that you can see before we get to the smaller units. And again, this is a really good example here of a fold. And we go back into the finer grained rocks, closely, thinly laminated. These rocks were deposited between the development of the Taconic Mountains, the Taconic Range in western Massachusetts, eastern New York, and southern Vermont. And then Abalone is sort of lurking off to the east, a small island chain, and it's going to move its way into and collide with North America. And that collision is actually going to form the Acadian orogeny, in which I was trying to show you some of these little folds that are in here because it's really deformed and the rocks are really squeezed and messed up. Still haven't found any of those ash layers that I was looking for, but maybe they'll show up again later. So we have this collision of Avalonia that created the Acadian orogeny, and that's what actually produced the volcanic activity that created Mount Desert Island that we're going to go and visit This is a really good example here of the Ellsworth Formation, that schist rock that we're just looking at. You can see the crenulations over here on the corner. This is just in a parking lot at a gas station where I happen to be. That wasn't an earthquake, I just shook my hand. Also, you can see in here some of the white layers that I was talking about. This is a more fresh exposure, and those white layers that you see in here represent volcanic ash falls that were incorporated into the rocks. Okay, I'm back at Acadia National Park today, and what I wanted to show you here was this is a spot at Hull's Cove, and in several of the places we're going to talk about rising land after the retreat of the continental ice sheet. And right here you can effectively see some of the results of that. If you look in the background, back by the house, you can see several places where there's horizontal lines going across the screen. One like right there, and another one further back that the house is on. Those are thought to represent raised beaches that as the land rose up out of the ocean, the beaches retreated. And what you can see is if I turn around, you'll see how far we are actually from the ocean. But this picture, this particular location was illustrated in a text in 1887 showing the same thing, and the building's still here, and you still can see the beaches on this house's front lawn. So if I turn, what you see here in front of you is Hull's Cove. Hull's Cove is just before you get to the visitor center at Acadia National Park. And I'm going to walk over across the street to a spot where you can see a little bit of vegetation there, and the tide is a little higher than I was here the other day. And unfortunately, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to all the places that I wanted to see, but I'm going to go take a look. I'm right here across the street where I just sort of videoed, and what you can see on top of here, this is polish on top of the rocks that you can see as the glacier continental ice sheet slid over this rock and smoothed the surface and polished it. And if you zoom in on this particular spot, you can actually see the lines in the ice that are going effectively in this direction across the rock surface. Okay, in this particular rock here, you can see two different color rocks. One's light and one's dark, and you should be able to tell in this picture which one's the older and which one's younger. So that would be a good question I might put on the exam, or questions about this particular field trip. And it goes back to looking at cross-cutting relationships. It's still at Hull's Cove, and you can actually see that this rock is really different than what you're going to see on Mount Desert Island. This is a really dark colored rock, and as we get closer and we can zoom in on it, what you're going to find is the grain size is fairly small. And if you remember from the lab on igneous rocks, we talked about something this like is part light colored, part dark colored. The grain size is small. I might have a hard time calling this an andesite, but it's equal amounts of light and dark color. But it's a different rock than what we're going to see on Mount Desert Island. You also see a lot of different veins in here where there's fractures that have filled with other material. Hey, you all made it. This field trip brought to you by the letter A and the number 2. A for Acadia, and 2 for the 2 hours you saved by not going on the bus.